Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we talk about UFOs and other weird wonders of the world. I'm your host, Stephen Hawk.
And I'm your co-host, Jimmy... What's my last name?
Co.
That's K-H-O.
Yeah. So what are you having tonight, anyway? What's in that fancy wine glass or whatever it is?
Apparently a very strong Chardonnay that made me forget my last name.
This is going to be a good one, no doubt about it.
It's going to be
great. I'm having a citrus drink, a squirt.
What is that, prune juice?
No, have you ever had this?
No.
It's a prune juice. Come on, man.
No, I've never had it.
It is Squirt, the thirst quencher, in case you're wondering. It is a grapefruit soda.
Grapefruit soda. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's pretty good. You should try one.
Haven't had sodas in years.
Oh, that's right.
There's wine now, so I don't have to drink sodas.
Yeah, ever since you turned 21,
Yes.
I haven't had a soda.
Exactly.
What have you seen interesting in the news this week?
So not a lot going on in the news, but I have been checking out the podcast, and it's really interesting. Some of my favorite scientist types have been making the rounds on podcasts talking about the UFO spike. The first thing I want to go to, though, is a CNN interview that included Steve Ganyard. He's a Colonel Steve Ganyard. And Lua Elizondo, and they were both on talking about, and you know how the CNN things are. It's like you got 3 minutes to talk, and you get to say like two things, and you really don't get to say much. But the really cool thing is they're both on board with this idea that we shouldn't jump to conclusions, but we should spend time and resources to get to the bottom of whatever is occurring with Navy pilots, if for no other reason than for pilot safety.
I mean, that's the number one reason to do it, really. I mean, if there has been some close calls, apparently there was a few years ago when they said they were seeing them every day around the Roosevelt.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. Mm-hmm.
Which we're going to get into a little bit later. There apparently were some very close calls. So absolutely, there should be some type of investigation just to figure out what's going on with that, whether it turns out to be true UAPs or if it turns out to be something else.
For the sake of our pilots, we should know, right?
Mm-hmm. For sure. So
two of my favorite podcasters, Sam Harris was on Lex Friedman's podcast. They both have podcasts. Do you know who Sam Harris is?
I don't think so.
He's a neuroscientist. He's done a lot of different works, basically in philosophy, talking about religion. Lately, though, he's been focused on other things. He got with Lex Friedman, who is a professor from MIT. I hope I'm getting that right, Lex. Anyway, he's a professor from MIT, or taught at MIT at some point. His main focus is in artificial intelligence. He has a podcast called the Lex Friedman Podcast. And
hey, we don't want to talk about competitors. No, I'm kidding.
And he had Sam Harris on, and they were talking about podcasts. And it was really interesting to get Sam's take on this, because the way he couched it is, if you're a super rigorous skeptic, and this information that's coming out, which seems to be relevant and true and pushing it closer to this scenario of us having unidentified craft that are beyond the scope of what we can do, any one country could do, that if you're this super rigorous skeptic, when the music stops, you're going to be in this awkward position of standing up when everyone else is sitting down. What? You got a little alien. That is awesome. Is that an alien keychain? Where'd you pick that up?
Well, it goes to the keys to my saucer outside, but it's weird, man. You know, we started this podcast, and then my wife's digging through a junk drawer, and she said, "Hey, look what I found. It's a little glow-in-the-dark alien keychain." So he's now my mascot.
Man, I want one.
I have no idea where this even came from. It just appeared one day.
It materialized.
It materialized on my desk.
Yeah,
of course, it was explained. My wife found it. So
might have been more. You're like a dog in a field of squirrels. You know, you get so distracted so easily. So anyway, the net of the Sam Harris interview was essentially that we need to be honest about this. We need to approach it from a scientific approach. You know, we need to apply the scientific principle to it, method. We have to also understand from a scientist perspective, there's a probability that they apply to the UFO phenomena. It is how much of the material that's been presented to me is enough to spike my curiosity to want to go and explore that particular observation or that particular mystery, and it's just not there yet. And in part, some of that is stigma that we've talked about before. That's just part of the topic of UFOs. And then there's Neil deGrasse Tyson on Joe Rogan. I know some of our listeners out there may be a little frustrated with Neil because he is a scientist through and through. But he said essentially the same thing, that the Navy really should be spending the resources to get to the bottom of this. It's important for them to understand what's in our airspace and what is going on. He's not completely off the possibility this could be something extraterrestrial. That's probably, though, the last thing on his list. He tends to think that it's probably something related to sensors or some program that the pilots were unaware of, be it, a foreign weapons platform or a domestic weapons platform that they were made aware of, something along those lines. But still, the important thing here is we have more and more scientists, even those who are incredibly skeptical, who are on board with investigating this stuff. And that's pretty awesome, I think.
Yeah, for instance, I've seen several skeptics, Mick West, saw him, and several other skeptics who really think there's probably some type of reasonable explanation for the 3 Navy videos. On the other hand, if they are posing a risk to our pilots, it's good to know what they are. And I'm trying to think of the SETI scientists. That's actually what I was looking up here because, these guys have been anti-UFO big time because a lot of UFO people like Stanton Friedman, who's passed away now.
Yeah, are you talking about Seth Shostak?
Yes.
With SETI?
I was trying to think of his name. Anyway, I saw him interviewed about him the other day, and he does point out something, which is, hey, we've got so many satellites and so many sensors that if UFOs are there, especially now, we should be able to see them. But then I think part of that goes back to you. A few episodes ago, we're talking about these sensors do record that, but they record a lot of things around the Earth, but they filter out anomalous things because they're programmed to look for planes and ICBMs and all these other things. So, I don't know.
Yeah, Neil made that same point in his interview with Joe. One problem I have with it is the degree to where they overestimate the location of cameras over the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. I'm just saying, the world is a big place, and most of it is ocean, and most of that doesn't have a tourist with a cell phone.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a big planet, and maybe we are seeing most of the Earth, but it doesn't mean someone's looking at all the data at one time. If we start taking this thing seriously, you talked about how easy it could be to crunch those numbers if you had the right parameters to look for.
Oh, definitely. And the data's setting there. The decades and decades of data, according to Christopher Mellon, from systems that we've had in play since the 70s at least, and maybe even further back, where we've collected massive amounts of data that all we have to do is go mine it and look for patterns. So at the very least, we should spend, a small portion of our budget to look at that. Yeah, it wouldn't take much either, I wouldn't think, in terms of funding.
And somebody may have done it. We just don't know about it.
That's possible.
It could be classified. For instance, a lot of those capabilities, even if the information wouldn't necessarily be considered classified, the way they got that information would be. They're not going to want to tell people how they were able to find out that a flying saucer was passing Samoa.
Right. They don't want to reveal, the system's capabilities. Yeah.
Defense capabilities. So that makes a lot of sense. Anything else? I know for me this week, I haven't really dug into any news or anything. I've seen a couple of interviews and things like that. Nothing really new. Just kind of waiting for this report for next month that's supposed to be coming out. The one that was part of the appropriations bill that was signed in. They gave them, 6 months to disclose what they have on UFOs or something like that?
Yeah, it's coming out in June, and I can't wait for it. I think it's already gone to Congress. I saw that. Yeah, I saw that somewhere where I think it went to Congress, but I'm not sure about that. So don't quote me, folks, but it's coming at least sometime in June. There was one other YouTube channel I wanted to promote here, and I'm getting nothing for this. I just found it. It's Fran Blanche, and she's an electrical engineer about our age. She talks about the UFO stuff, and what caught me was she talked about watching In Search of and that Project Blue Book or UFO Project show that came out in the 70s that was based on Project Blue Book.
Yeah. It was called Project UFO.
Project UFO, that's right. I watched an episode of that last night. It is terrible.
Is it on YouTube? I know the special effects are bad. I remember the special effects being bad even when I was a kid.
The special effects were the best part of it. Yeah, it's on YouTube. You should go watch it.
Yeah, I've watched a couple of old things. I watched the old Betty and Barney Hill movie that we talked about during the Travis Walton episode. I watched that. Yeah, it's okay.
Let me just say this, that the original acting in Dark Shadows is better than, for those people who don't know the original Dark Shadows, you should go back and check it out. It's awesome stuff.
Don't be messing with my Dark Shadows. It's all available on Internet Movie Database. So
yeah, I know you're a big fan. Have you finished it yet?
Every single episode, 1,225.
You know what I loved about that show was where they would just leave in people in the background walking through the scene, or little posts coming down, or
you see the mic, the boom mic. You see the boom mic every episode. You see the shadow to the boom mic nearly every episode.
Noodle Arm Eddie is controlling the boom arm this episode.
Yeah, well, they shoot back in those days in the 60s and the early 70s. They shot those things like it was a play. I mean, they did not have time to edit. If you find a tape edit, they're there, but they're extremely rare. It'll be one every maybe 10 episodes, if that much. Somebody really had to mess up, because they'll mess up lines really bad. It's like watching a play. Mm-hmm. If you've ever watched live theater, if somebody starts losing their line or something like that, the other actor may kind of help them out. And then, too, there's a teleprompter that has their lines, and then you can see it all the time. The actors would be right in the middle of a scene, like facing someone, and then look over to the left and start talking because they read the teleprompter.
Do they have teleprompters, or did they just use big cards?
No, I was pretty sure it was teleprompters. Yeah. My wife and I got into a thing watching those. I don't know why. We just saw it, and I think the first 2 seasons, called Dark Shadows in the Beginning, is actually on Amazon, which we have, Amazon Prime. We started watching it just for the heck of it, like months ago. We're almost done. We watch maybe one episode every couple days or something like that, but we started watching that along. That's a lot of episodes, man. It's 1,225 episodes. We're almost done. We're in the 1,100s, like 1,175 or something. But it's been it was fun. It was a lot of reminiscing about. I was a very small child when that show came out.
It's like being on a Disney ride, like Splash Mountain, and you're like excited about the ride when you first start out, and then it's like you're just stuck in the line and you're going to see it through to the end.
No, man, it's cool. I liked it. I like it a lot. They borrow a lot of story ideas off of classic literature. Everything's there. There's Frankenstein, of course, Dracula, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the Wolfman. I mean, you name it. That show did something with it, plus ghosts and everything else.
It's like 12 seasons, right? How many seasons is that thing?
No, it's way more than that.
Oh, my gosh.
I don't know how many seasons. I mean, it was a daily soap opera.
Yeah, I remember it.
30 minutes.
I remember it as a kid.
Yeah, so it ran from like 66 to 72, I think.
Yeah, I must have seen the reruns because, I was 2 and 72.
They made 2 theatrical films, one called The House of Dark Shadows and one called...
Dark Shadows.
Something else of Dark Shadows.
Oh, with the original cast?
Yeah, most of them.
And then they had the Johnny Depp one.
Yeah, I've never seen it.
It's actually pretty funny.
I know, it's a comedy. Well, I mean, I liked Dark Shadows as a kid, so... Even though watching that, we laugh, we love watching it. It's a lot of fun. I think we talk about. I don't know if that actually counts for paranormal. So.
I was getting ready to say, welcome to the Dark Shadows podcast.
But
we're talking about all things Dark Shadows.
My wife belongs to like a Facebook group or something. They're into it, man. They're all the time posting stuff, little things, little trivia things about it.
We're going to start releasing a podcast on Thursdays. Cosmic Sponge, Dark Shadows.
Yeah, the sub feed. That's where we go over every single episode. Well, I thought Quentin should have done this. But anyway.
So let's jump in back to the UFO stuff, because aren't we supposed to be doing that?
That's probably a good idea. I'm wondering how many listeners we've lost just in that conversation.
We've probably gained a bunch of dark...
Will talk. I promise we'll come back to UFOs.
We've gained a bunch of Dark Shadows audience.
But speaking of listeners, we are continually amazed at just the very few episodes we've had, how many listeners we are getting. So thank you to everyone who has tuned in and downloaded. We hope you're finding some great information here. We encourage you to reach out to the show at firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com, especially if you have some type of extraordinary encounter of your own. We would love to hear from you, and with your permission, we will share it with our listeners on the show, and we can keep it all anonymous if you like. One other thing I would like to ask you to do is to please rate and review the podcast. If you like what you hear, give us a good rating, and it will bump us up in the standings so that it makes it easier for other people to find the show. So again, thank you so much for downloading the show and listening. If you have any comments, find any errors, have a different opinion about something that Jimmy and I have discussed, don't hesitate. Write in and let us know how you feel. About the only thing I got into this week, been reading some papers from Jacques Vallée, the French UFO investigator. I know I chatted with you off air a little bit about that earlier today. I like some of his ideas. I'm going to order one of his books. I finished the Hynek book, finally.
Which book are you going to order? Because Vallée's written a lot of books.
He's written quite a few, but I'm going to get the one, I think it's called Passport to Magonia.
Oh, yeah. That's the one I got.
That's the big one. How did you say it?
I don't know how to say it. I mean, I just saw it today and ordered it after you told me about it last night.
Oh, did you really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, I'm going to read that one. And I've read some of his scientific papers. And I think he's a brilliant dude. I mean, I think he is something like 87 or 88 now. I'd love to have him on the show, but I doubt we'd ever get him on here.
Yeah, I don't think of him as a UFOologist. Is that how you say that? Ufologist. UFOologist. A ufologist. I don't think of him that way. I think of him as a scientist because he
is a scientist.
Exactly.
He's a computer scientist, for one thing.
Mathematics, computer science, and physics.
And an investor.
And an investor.
Yeah, he's done a lot. He's written quite a few books on not only UFOs, but investment and computer technology.
He's probably one of my favorite people in the field.
Mine too, for sure. Yep. I want to know where he got that UFO debris, though. You know, the stuff in the movie Phenomena that he takes in there in that little tiny tube, and he has the guy from Stanford run tests on it, and they say that it looks like the material had been manufactured at the atomic level.
Yep.
I want to know where that came from.
He talks about it either in the Phenomenon or he talks about it in Joe Rogan's podcast.
I'm going to have to find that Joe Rogan podcast then. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I've been doing. And then I'll do a research for what we're talking about today. And for instance, we're going to be talking about ATIP, and we're going to be talking about the Roosevelt encounters. We did the Nimitz encounter. It was not really our first episode, but for whatever reason, it pops up as our first episode. Our first episode is the one just where we talk about UFOs, Bigfoot, and what have you. Just our very first episode of getting to know where each other stand on that sort of thing. And that's when I found out Jimmy doesn't believe in anything.
And Steve doesn't stand on anything.
What are you talking about?
I couldn't get you to commit to anything. You're like, what's your % chance? You'd be like, I don't want to say. I don't want to commit, man.
I don't have that mathematical mind. I don't think in percentages like you do. It's either, here or there. It's here or there.
Black or white, on or off, yes or no.
Yeah, exactly.
Duck or cow.
It fluctuates. It's a variable. It's a delta T for me. So
there you go.
Change over time.
Getting fancy.
Any type of
nerd
follow-up on the Travis Walton episode that we did last week?
Yes, I could think of one thing. I could think of my bad geography. So apparently Chernobyl does not exist in Russia at all. It exists in the Ukraine. It was the Soviet Union at the time, so it was all Russia to me.
Right.
I'm a kid of the 80s, both in a public school system sense.
You always blame the public school system. Come on, man.
It really wasn't the public school system. It was that. Yeah, so anyway, for you folks out there who were screaming at your speakers.
Chernobyl is in the Ukraine, part of the former Soviet Union.
Now I'm surprised you didn't correct me, because you are all into like history, geography.
Well, what's weird is I caught it while I was editing. I don't know why I didn't catch it before.
I caught it about the time that you called and told me wrong. And that's the only time I've got. My wife makes fun of me all the time. As much as I am left brain into the sciences and stuff, I know absolutely nothing about history.
I've noticed that about you.
And geography.
Speaking of Air Force cover-up, or government cover-up. We'll go to today's two main topics. The first one is ATIP. This has been in the news a lot. We've decided we've done a couple of old cases. Let's go ahead and try and shed some light on some of the things that are going on right now. As Jimmy said, you can see Luis Elizondo, Christopher Mellon, some of the main players of this, quite a lot in the news right now. And ATIP is directly related to the three videos that are out there, the Navy videos that kind of got all of this new talk about UFOs and UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, out there in the mainstream media. So what is ATIP? It all started in 2007 with an individual named Harry Reid, who's retired now, was the Democratic Senate Majority Leader from Nevada.
That's where Area 51 is.
That is where Area 51 is, or Groom Lake, and S4.
I smell a government cover-up coming.
And it's also where George Knapp's TV station is in Las Vegas.
Disinformation campaign.
And Bob Lazar did his interviews in Las Vegas. There's something about Las Vegas, man. It's all government cover-up and UFOs out there. So anyway, Harry Reid, I think really the reason this got started, let's really talk about this. The reason this program even existed or got started was a guy named Bob Bigelow. He's pretty well known in the UFO circles, and Bob Bigelow, he made his fortune in real estate, and he owns the, Comfort Suites or something hotel chain. Mm-hmm. He has spent a good bit of his personal fortune being interested in all sorts of things related to the paranormal, and namely UFOs. Now, it's no secret that Bob Bigelow was a pretty good campaign contributor to Harry Reid.
He's pretty good.
So I feel like that's where the urging of let's study UFOs came from, and why Harry Reid became interested. Probably him and Bob Bigelow, I'm sure, are well acquainted, and no doubt they got together, and Bob's like, these UFOs are great.
So just to put that in context, he only gave about $10,000 over the course of many years, and so it was a pretty modest sum, all things considered.
They are friends, though. But what I'm getting at here really is that no doubt Harry Reid became interested in UAP or UFOs because of Mr. Bigelow. And I know Bigelow has done a lot of good stuff, spent a lot of his own private money investigating UFOs. Mm-hmm. So, kudos to him. So Harry Reid goes to Republican Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska and Democratic Senator Dan Inouye of Hawaii and secures $22 million of funding for what would become known as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. From henceforth, we shall call it ATIP.
Yeah, that's a mouthful otherwise.
And this was funding for ATIP. It was an unclassified but unpublicized investigatory effort dedicated to studying unidentified aerial phenomenon. They began in 2007. I think the program actually started in 2008. Luis Elizondo, who you see all over the news all the time, joined the program in 2008 and became its leader in 2010. And the program was defunded in 2012 but continued to go, so I don't know how that works, but one of the people who benefited from this was Mr. Bigelow. They put it out to bid to their first facilities and places to work and all these kind of things, I guess. Bob Bigelow was the only bidder, and so he won the contract. I guess where most of the millions went.
All of it, right? $22 million. That was the contract. It was for $22 million. The entire budget was awarded to Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies. That's the name of his company that received it.
I know it's BAASS or something, looks like badass almost, only without the D.
It's like you're saying bass. So, yeah. And, it wasn't defunded necessarily. They acquired funding that was $22 million over 5 years. So at the end of that 5 years, they just basically went through the program funds, and that was only funded for that 5 years.
But yeah, they weren't renewed, though, and they didn't get any more money. Now, the program continued. In 2017, Luis Elizondo resigned from the program, and it was in October of 2017, and 2 months later, the story broke with the New York Times saying the government has a hidden UFO program. to study UAPs. That's when the news of all this stuff started to break. One thing that Christopher Mellon, who was working at Capitol Hill at the time, and Luis Elizondo had done was, acquired these 3 videos. And that's where they came from, To the Stars Academy, which is where they went to work after their government jobs, which I think Luis Elizondo's still there, but I don't think Christopher Mellon's still with To the Stars Academy.
3 of them left. Steve Justice, who worked at Skunk Works previously as an engineer. Christopher Mellon left, and Lou Elizondo left. All 3 of them, yeah.
One of the things I was reading said he was still there, but it probably just needs to be updated. I think it was on Wikipedia or something.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, yeah, that's really the To the Stars Academies who released the 3 videos that we're going to be talking about. 2 of them tonight. We already talked about the Nimitz encounter, which is the video known as the FLIR video.
Correct.
The only thing that I can find, and Jimmy, you may even know more about this than I do, but the only thing I could find that they really accomplished that we know about, the things that have been unclassified, was 38 different studies.
Yeah, 38 studies. Yeah, and a 494-page report, which is yet to be released, that was about alleged worldwide UFO sightings, right?
Yeah, and some of the subject matter is pretty crazy. I'm not going to read them all. I mean, there's some that's advanced nuclear propulsion for manned deep space missions. That was a study or a paper written by a Dr. F. Winterberg, University of Nevada. And you'll notice some of these are professors that no doubt were associated with Bigelow Aerospace or Senator Reed, perhaps. Let's see, biosensors, high-frequency gravitational wave communication. All of these are unclassified.
Yeah,
so I guess this is where our $22 million went.
Yeah, well, 2 of my favorites are state-of-the-art and evolution of high-energy laser weapons. Laser.
Is that one going to be classified?
Well, I don't know if it's classified. I think all these are unclassified.
It says unclassified for official use only, but they all say that.
Transversable wormholes, stargates, and negative energy, baby. And invisible cloaking by Dr. Ulf Leonhardt of the University of St. Andrews.
Yeah, here's some different things on fusion propulsion, detection of high-resolution tracking of vehicles at hypersonic velocities. There's another one from the University of Las Vegas. Now, one study that's been released, and I did actually read some of it, pretty interesting. Let me pull that one up. This one is called Clinical, Medical, Acute, and Subacute Field Effects on Human Dermal and Neurological Tissues.
I saw that one. I love it.
That's the alternate title, but the title is Field Effects on Biological Tissues by Dr. Kit Green, Wayne State University. It's 53 pages. You can find it where else? On the Black Vault. So really what this study is, let's just put it out there. I'm going to summarize it while I read the whole thing. So what this is the effect that UFOs can have on people that come close to them. People that have a close encounter with a flying saucer, the physical effects that can come from that. Because apparently a lot of people suffer some real physical effects. He correlated some of this data with people that were involved in accidents that were exposed to very high RF fields, which is a radio frequency microwaves. For instance, if you stand in front of a radar dish, like a radar transmitter, it's microwave radiation. It will literally cook you. It's the same principle. It works in your microwave oven. You're cooked from the inside out. There's been people killed that way, technicians in the military and so forth, when they've accidentally fired up a radar set. But he correlates the exposure to this ultra-high frequency radiation that a lot of people who've been exposed to UFOs and flying saucers exhibit the same symptoms. Why are you laughing?
Because Wayne State University is in Detroit, and I was just thinking that if you wanted to pick up, people for your study, you just close your eyes and throw a rock.
Hey, man, we may have listeners from Detroit.
I love you guys in Detroit. Detroit Rock City, baby. You might want to edit that out.
I don't know what I'm going to do with you, man.
Go.
I'm over here talking about a serious subject about people being exposed to flying saucers, man.
In Detroit.
And what kind of effect it has on their bodies. They get radiation sickness, their hair comes out. They get all this redness and swelling and all kinds of stuff.
But not
so
in
anyway,
Russia.
It's a pretty neat study.
Not,
I liked it.
Not in Russia. In Ukraine, though.
What about in the Ukraine?
That's right. It's a commonplace thing in Ukraine.
Man, you're just like totally killing my subject. I can't wait till you start yours.
Oh, I'm going to be in trouble.
All right. So anyway, that's a pretty neat one. There's a few of these that have been declassified. I found it interesting. There's some skeptics out there that are calling some of these studies junk science.
Pseudoscience.
I don't know so much about that. It looked like a pretty good paper. I'm not a scientist, though. There's another one, Traversable Wormholes, Stargates, and Negative Energy by Dr. Eric Davis. That one also has been declassified and is available, and it has been published. It's 43 pages. If that sounds interesting to you, Invisible Cloaking is also available. It's 29 pages. I have not read either one of those reports. The Advanced Space Propulsion Based on Vacuum, Space-Time Metric Engineering by Dr. Hal Puthoff, Earth Tech International, is available. What?
Yeah.
Right.
I just want to come back in here. Hal Puthoff, didn't he do the remote sensing studies? He was one of the guys who did the remote sensing studies.
I think so. I think you're right. The CIA's remote viewing studies.
Remote viewing. And he also was part of To the Stars Academy. And he was also a mentor to Dr. Eric Davis, who is a physicist. And he's the one who's recently a little bit more notoriety because he's the one that the quote that the government has materials from off-world vehicles. That's where that comes from, is Dr. Eric Davis.
Yeah, I still don't know where to come in on that. On one hand, I'm a little skeptical of Roswell. Sorry, true believers. But I'm still working on that. I've read a few books on it so far and also looked at a lot of stuff on the web. And I know that's a big one because it's sort of like if Roswell's true, then that means it's all true. All the government conspiracy, the UFO cover-up, we have crashed alien vehicles and alien ETs in a freezer somewhere. If that's true, that means you go that way. And then if it's not true, then that means I'm kind of where I am right now, which is I'm trying to figure out what UFOs are on the surface of it. You know, I'm looking at it as if I didn't know anything about UFOs. I'm trying to read as much, especially the declassified government documents. I'm getting a lot of information from that. And everything that I've read so far leads me to believe that it all goes back to the Robertson panel. It's not that they're trying to cover anything up. They're trying to keep it down. They don't want the public to get worked up about UFOs. Do I think there's some secret stuff that they're not talking about? Absolutely. Absolutely believe that. But I am very intrigued about crashed saucers. I mean, I have to admit that. Here's one thing. I wasn't even going to bring this one up tonight, but I'm going to go ahead and bring it up now. I got to find the document.
Yeah, we're only at 45 minutes, so might as well get into it so we can stretch it out.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I'm game.
All right. Talk about something, Jimmy, while I'm looking up this FBI document.
Yeah, so I really want to see what's in that 494-page report that they still have classified that documents alleged worldwide UFO sightings that ATIP put out. Now, ATIP did turn into another program, or they started up a new program still studying UFOs. It's called the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force, or UAPTF. I think ATIP sounds better. But
sounds cooler.
That started in June of 2020.
Because the government only admitted they were still looking at UFOs just a few months ago, that this program still existed in some form or fashion. So there's still someone looking at it. For all I know, it's just the same way Blue Book was back in the day, and there's someone who answers the phone and one field agent.
And
that's pretty much what Blue Book was all through the 60s.
And he's driving through the South 50s. And stopping at every burger joint and having something to eat.
It's like Scully and Mulder.
I want that job.
I'd love that job.
That would be the best job in the world.
Just walk in and say, all these UFOs you people saw, here, give me all these photos and data, and this never happened.
Exactly.
That'd be awesome. If you say something, you can be in trouble, man. I don't know if I could keep a straight face. So, all right, so this FBI document, here we go. This is the most #1 downloaded document on the FBI's website. You can freely find it yourself, just as I just did. Type in HOTTEL document. It's the Hotel document. I don't know how to pronounce that name. And the guy's name is Guy. So, the guy, Hotel Guy.
How do you spell that again?
HOTTEL. Hotel. I don't know.
Hotel.
Probably the Hotel division.
There you go.
This is a field agent that had sent this to the director of the FBI. They're not named. This document originates from March 22nd, 1950. And it says the following information was furnished to SA, and then it's redacted. So we don't know who. And it says an investigator for the Air Force stated that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape but only 3 foot tall, dressed in metallic cloth of very fine texture. Each body was, can't really read, was bandaged, maybe, in a manner similar to blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. According to Mr. Blank, redacted, the saucers were found in New Mexico due to the fact that a very high-powered radar set up in that area is believed the radar interferes with the controlling mechanics of the saucers. It goes on to say no further evaluation was attempted by SA, redacted, concerning the above. So this is a real document that exists on the FBI's website. So, I don't know. It's something that an Air Force individual apparently told a field investigator, and he sent this letter into the Home Office. What do you make of that? Did you ever hear of this document before?
No, you were actually the first one to tell me about it. Though, now that I'm reading about it a little bit, not only is the information not firsthand and far removed from New Mexico, it is connected to a 60-year-old hoax that resulted in a conviction for fraud. The memo was the end of a long chain of tale-telling. The hotel memo repeats a story from Wendato Echo, a legal newspaper in Kansas City, Kansas in January of 1950, which was repeated by Guy Hotel by an Air Force investigator who read the story and pasted it into a memo himself. Such practices were common in the days before scanning documents was possible and memos had to be typed out. That news story draws from the account of a Rudy Fick, a local used car dealer. Fick got the story from 2 men, I.J. Van Horn and Jack Murphy, who said they got the story from a man named Coulter, actually a radio station advertising manager named George Collier. Collier got the story from Silas Newton. The hoax begins with Newton and his accomplice, Leo A. Gebauer. Newton and Gebauer were peddling doodlebugs, devices that could supposedly find oil, gas, gold, or anything else that the target of the con was interested in finding. In an interview in 2003 for a documentary called The Other Side of Truth, written and directed by Paul Kimball, a UFO researcher, described the original hoax that led to the hotel memo.
Okay. Good enough.
Man.
Regardless of that, it is the most downloaded document on the FBI's website. There's a few other things, but the FBI wasn't as interested. That mostly what you'll find that the FBI did was they were interested in investigating UFO groups
and individuals and discrediting them if they could.
A part of it was because they were always worried about subversion. They were worried about communists infiltrating those groups and, again, bringing back the UFO panic of the early 1950s. The government was very cognizant of that, the FBI, the CIA, and to this day, that's one reason I think they try to keep it, even though UFOs are very popular, I think they try to keep it tamped down. The government doesn't want to say too much. And as far as this report's coming out in June, I think there'll be very little. I mean, I hope there's another video. That would be cool, but I'm not. In fact, I expect very little. They'll probably declassify these documents from ATIP or something. And I mean, what do you expect to see from it?
I did see something in a Reddit thread where Lou Elizondo was indicating that the people that were still on the inside, that were still communicating with him, were indicating that it was going to be a much ado about nothing. So expect to be disappointed, I think, is essentially the message coming from Lou. I didn't get the details of that, so again, take it with a grain of salt at this point, but that seemed to be the indication from a Reddit thread with a video, I think, that I probably should have looked at and just didn't have the time.
I think the difference now, between now and what they used to say, was they used to say UFOs aren't real, and now they're saying UFOs are real, but we don't know what they are. Do they pose a threat to national security? Not really. And I think that's pretty much all we're ever going to get from the government. Because, really, the Pentagon's not going to... I just don't think they're going to come forward and say they're really a threat to national security, but there's nothing we can do about them, right? We couldn't shoot one down if we tried. It's obviously some kind of advanced technology, so what can we do about it? Well, nothing. I mean, maybe they could shoot something down. I don't know. Maybe they have shot something down. I don't know. But I guess where I was going with back to the hotel video, or I'm sorry, memo. I guess when I read that, I didn't really been going through like all kinds of declassified documents, but I still wonder, and then like in that movie that Jacques Vallée, we just talked about earlier in the podcast, had some debris allegedly from a flying saucer and that sort of stuff. I just don't know. Maybe there is something there. Maybe something did go down somewhere, sometime. I just don't know. I don't know about Roswell. I have reasons to doubt that. I mean, I just don't know yet. I don't know that we'll ever know, to be honest with you. I doubt people like you and me who are kind of halfway skeptical about it will ever truly know the truth.
I look at it this way. So far, there's been no information put in front of me that's convinced me. But
right.
There has been information put in front of me that's moved my needle from extreme skeptic to there are possibilities that may pan out here that lead us towards a conclusion that there are vehicles that are operating in our airspace that exceed the capabilities of any terrestrial agency. So that's where I sit right now. I'm open to the possibility more than ever in my life, but also still incredibly skeptical, and I haven't seen enough evidence. But I do want, at the very least, I want what Christopher Mellon wants. We already have the data sitting there. It's just ridiculous that we don't spend $50 essentially to mine that data and put together a report on it that indicates exactly what's going on in terms of patterns we might see in data that indicate a intelligent flight vehicles that don't correspond to any commercial airliner or military craft and exhibit characteristics that are beyond the capabilities of any ship at the time at which that data was created. I mean, for me, that would be huge either way. If they compile that data and find absolutely zero indications of an intelligent craft, that moves the needle really far for me in one direction.
Yeah, but I don't think you can totally discount the phenomenon just because if they do go through that data and they may release something like that. Hey, we went through all that data that Christopher Mellon was talking about, and then I'm sure they'll have their military acronyms for it. We went through all that. We found nothing. Or we found this one thing. Or we found something that couldn't be identified, but we think it's a flock of seagulls. I ran so far. No. I couldn't get away.
You're such a nerd.
I'll have to edit that. Come on.
No,
anyway,
leave it in.
I couldn't say flock of seagulls without it. What about that dude's haircut? Right?
Love it.
So
I wish I had that hair.
I wish I had enough hair to do that haircut.
Is that right?
You have no hair.
Shut up.
So
I do have a little bit of hair.
Yeah, if you shaved your eyebrows, you'd look like a cancer victim.
Screw you, man. I have a lot of hair on my chest.
I'll take your word for it. So, Jimmy, put your shirt back on. Oh my God, you are hairy.
That's my back.
So where were we? Don't we talk about UFOs or something on this podcast? So if they, I know what you're saying. You're saying, okay, if they go through all this sensory data and they don't find any UFOs, they don't find anything flying around, then you're going to say, okay, they don't exist. Right?
No, I'm going to say
reports.
What I'm going to say is that the needle moves closer to the zero, but not to zero. I'm not willing to go to zero on just about anything. I mean, there are some things I'm willing to go to zero on or near zero, but not with UFOs. I mean, I think there's something to them, whether they're natural or whether they're something else. Definitely something to them. I'm just saying that if you can't find any patterns of intelligent UFO capabilities in all of that data, for me, it moves the needle away from being probable. And alternatively, if you find patterns, it moves it to me being more sure that there's something out there that's beyond what we normally encounter in our skies.
What if UFOs are some type of intradimensional craft? What if the way they travel here, when we see them or encounter them, It may be that they're not coming from outer space at all. I mean, whatever they are, whoever they are, maybe they do one of these wormholes and they just, bam, appear right there. You know, like I told you the one time I saw the big smoke ring in the sky. Then you're not going to get all that data of UFOs flying all over the planet, right? What if they can create a wormhole, whether it's into another dimension or if it's to another planet? They can travel to, your house and do whatever they're going to do. And whatever the UFO people do, nobody knows really what their mission is. And then they can just zap right back out again and go back home or back to their base or whatever.
Back to their base.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I don't know that you could just totally rule out UFOs if someone were to go through all that data and say they didn't find anything.
Yeah, that's not what I'm saying.
Which could be, and which really could be a thing. I could see that happening. They won't tell us if they see anything, but they'll be sure and share it with us if they don't. On the other hand, they probably don't want to reveal their capabilities. So I doubt you'll ever have an answer to that question, at least until it becomes declassified 15 years from now or 20 years from now, whenever they say it's no longer a threat to national security that you know this.
Or after our alien ant overlords take over.
Yeah, after the alien overlords take over, they may let you know if they were seen or the secret data.
I, for one, accept and bow before our alien overlords.
So, all right, let's move on to our next topic, I guess. I think we're digressing a little bit here.
Please consider me for a middle management position.
But, the truth is, I do think about a lot of things, even though I'm supposed to be doing the research on ATIP and that, which, I mean, I did. But then I have to admit, most of my studying on the subject really didn't have anything to do with ATIP this past week. It was reading some scientific papers by Jacques Vallée and finishing Hynek's. Well, I finished Hynek's book a couple weeks ago, but there's some follow-up to the Robertson panel in that I wish I'd have finished that book before we did that episode. One of the people had resigned. She allowed her resignation letter to be published in the book in several pages talking about all the problems they had. And it was pretty obvious from the beginning of the Condon committee, not the Robertson panel, but the Condon committee. She had resigned from it, and it was obvious from the very beginning that Lowe was the one that ran the day-to-day. Mm-hmm. Even though Condon was in charge of it, he actually did very little work on it. And it was a guy named Lowe, Bob Lowe or something like that, he's the one that did the memo to the faculty about, don't worry, we'll have the right answer. From the very beginning, he's like, here's how we need to organize the book. It was just from the onset, it was like, okay, this is how we're going to get to the point that UFOs don't exist. Whenever he would travel, he would make it a point to travel to some crackpot somewhere. Instead of traveling to the site of, let's say, where there was a really big event, let's say like the Michigan thing or something, but like if some big UFO event happened, he wouldn't go there and investigate that or talk to those witnesses or anything. But if it was a crackpot, he would go out of his way to go talk to that crackpot so that he could put that in the book.
Manipulating the data.
It was obvious from the very beginning. Like somebody with some crazy claim that they talked to somebody from Jupiter and it was in a paper or something. I mean, he literally would fly across the country to go interview that person. Because it was obvious the direction he wanted the book to go to from the beginning. That was a few episodes ago. It was on the history of UFOs Declassified Part 2 that we talked about the Robertson panel and the Condon committee and why everyone makes fun of UFOs. So let's move on.
Well, we probably should just clear up a few things with the ATEP stuff, just one or two.
Go ahead.
Things.
Go for it.
Yeah. First, the actual contract was labeled Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program. That's what they called the contract. So ATIP was the program, and then the project was this Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program that was given to Bigelow Aerospace. And I guess there's a lot of misinformation or misunderstandings of that out in the UFO community about what those two different things are. So that's the difference between those two. ATIP's the program that was funded for $22 million, and then that $22 million then was passed off to Bigelow under this project, which was the Aerospace Weapon Systems Applications Program. The other thing is that there's a lot of questions about Lou Elizondo's role in ATIP, and there's some misinformation that's been going on out there, and it's not clear to me, I don't know if you were able to find this information, exactly when Lou took over as director of ATIP.
2010. I found a letter from Harry Reid, but I've already closed it out because I thought we were moving on. Hang on.
So anyway, the other thing is the Pentagon admitted it investigates UFOs to the New York Post. And investigative journalist Stephen Greenstreet with the New York Post had received word from the Pentagon through spokesperson Christopher Sherwood that ATIP did pursue research and investigation into unidentified aerial phenomena. And understandably, the story went viral. Roughly 7 months later, the Pentagon's stance seems to have changed, and although the statement was given to the New York Post was accurately reported, the Pentagon now states it was not entirely fact-based. When asked about the discrepancy at the time, Mr. Sherwood was repeating information that had been provided by a previous spokesperson some 2 years earlier. That previous spokesperson no longer with the organization and can't comment on why that person's explanation of ATIP included that it had looked into anomalous events. According to all the official information of ATIP was that it did not pursue research and investigation into unidentified aerial phenomenon and was not part of the technical studies nor the reports produced by the program. There is still a little bit of confusion on that front, and I'm not sure where that all plays out at the end of the day or how important it is. It's just worth noting, I think.
Here it is. Harry Reid, in April 26, 2021, which is very recently, I guess maybe there had been some question about Lou's role. It says, to whom it may concern, as the United States Senate Majority Leader, I worked with Republican Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska and Democratic Senator Dan Inouye of Hawaii to secure $22 million of funding for what would become known as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, an unclassified but unpublicized investigatory effort dedicated to studying unidentified aerial phenomena. As one of the original sponsors of ATIP, I can state as a matter of record, Lou Elizondo's involvement and leadership role in this program. Mr. Elizondo is a former intelligence officer who has spent his career working tirelessly in the shadows on sensitive national security matters, including investigating UAPs and the head of ATIP. He performed these duties admirably. That's it. So I'm not sure who it says to who it may concern me. He just wrote that letter a few weeks ago.
That's good stuff. So I think that clears that up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least lends some weight to Elizondo's.
Yeah, so people can't say, oh, who do we even know this? Who is this guy? You know, what is this about? Now, there's no question he was an intelligence officer and he worked for the Department of Defense for quite a while. The nature of his type of work, he probably can't really talk about a lot of it, I would say.
Yeah.
He can talk about his UFO stuff, I guess, somewhat. But it always drives me nuts when him and Christopher Mellon are both like, oh, if you could see all of the stuff, you would be convinced. I'm like, will you quit saying that?
Why don't you just
gotta take your word for it?
Show us all the stuff, man. Show us all the stuff.
Yeah. It's like, okay, I guess, if you say so.
Talking about showing us all the stuff, let's drive into the next part, right?
All right, man, let's go on to the Roosevelt sightings. So these two sightings, really we're going to be talking about the two videos. These are the ones that are referred to as Gimbal and Go Fast. And Jimmy has done all of the work on this one. All I know is I can watch the videos and they're really cool.
Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to introduce some suspenseful music of some sort here as I talk about this amazing thing. In 2017, a New York Times article changed the UFO conversation, detailing Navy pilot encounters, which included 3 Navy videos labeled Gimbal, Go Fast, and FLIR. End suspenseful music. Or maybe keep it going. I don't know. The FLIR video was taken from November 2004 using an at-flare or advanced targeting forward-looking infrared pod. You can learn more about this video by checking out our podcast on the USS Nimitz encounter. The next 2 videos were taken in 2015 off the east coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Less is known about the specific encounters in the USS Roosevelt incident than the Nimitz case. However, a total of 5 to 6 pilots, I've heard it both ways, have testified before congressional committees behind closed doors. 2 of the 5 have gone on the record revealing themselves. These are Lieutenant Ryan Graves and Lieutenant Danny Aucoin. Ryan's interviews are a little bit more prolific, and we've learned more about what happened during that time period from him. And it's pretty interesting information where he addresses really how the military responded to these interactions that happened over essentially 2 years, or maybe a year between 2014 to March of 2015.
Let me interrupt you real quick.
Sure.
Now, I heard that some of these Navy pilots were seeing these objects every day for a period of time during their training, that nearly every day someone was encountering a UAP.
So,
is that true?
So Graves, Ryan, this comes from Ryan Graves, and he said essentially they were seeing these over the course of 2 years, practically every day. Now, maybe it's a little bit of an overstatement, I'm not sure, but when he says they were seeing them, he doesn't mean that the pilots were seeing them with their eyes. He means they were picking them up through their sensors.
I gotcha.
Ryan's only aware of 2, or only articulated 2 specific cases where pilots actually had eyes on. He doesn't really articulate the second one, he just mentions it. I wasn't able to find any place where he articulated what they actually saw. The first one, he did articulate what he saw there, or what the pilot saw there. 2 F-18 Hornets, Super Hornets, flew between approximately 400 feet apart. What appeared to be a spherical translucent cube, or sphere rather, and inside of that was a cube. So that was the one eyes on. What he's referring to is what the sensors were picking up. There were 2 sensors that were picking the data up. The first is your radar. Now, during this time, the radar had just recently been upgraded. The Super Hornets had a radar system that was an AN/APG-73 radar, and this was
that manufactured by the Raytheon Corporation?
Actually, it wasn't. It was manufactured by the Hughes Aircraft Company radar systems. I knew you were going to ask, so I looked it up. However, it was replaced by the AN/APG-79 radar, which was manufactured by the Raytheon Integrated Defense Systems contractor.
I knew it.
Now, Northrop Grumman was responsible for the design and construction, but Raytheon integrated the system together and was the prime contractor.
This is all a conspiracy of the Raytheon Corporation, because that FLIR pod was manufactured by the Raytheon Corporation.
Well, they're good at what they do.
Now all of these UAPs are showing up, so makes you wonder.
That's right. If you yourself want to go out and observe UAPs or UFOs and collect data on them, you need to contact Raytheon to get their latest AES radar AN/APG-79 system. Check them out.
I wonder how many millions that would cost you, if you could even buy it.
I doubt you can buy it. I do know they service it to Finland, Kuwait, Malaysia, and Switzerland.
Wow, man, you really did do some research.
Well, I read. So anyway, going back to our summary, some pretty interesting observations and learning a little bit more about the concerns that Ryan Graves and other pilots have about really the response of the leadership to what was occurring during those 2 years. And it was really, while reports were going up the chain, it didn't seem as if anything substantial was being done for the pilots themselves in terms of assuring their safety. I mean, they were flying and almost hit one of these objects that were in the air, and they don't know what it is. They did do an accident report, and then nothing was really done initially. Subsequently, after probably a year, and after Ryan had already left the area and been deployed overseas in the Persian Gulf, they did start doing TAMs, and I think they were called NOTAMs, which Notice to Airmen, and it's basically something that they publish right before in your briefing, your pre-flight briefing, where they basically say, hey, look, these things were up there. Everybody's seeing them. Just be aware. Keep your eyes open. So the question comes up a lot. to Ryan, why didn't you guys just chase one of these things down, right? You're not seeing them. You're seeing them on the radar. Well, no, they're not just seeing them on the radar. And this is the really interesting part. So if you're just seeing them on the radar, there's a potential that there's some kind of system up there that can spoof the radar. But they're also capturing it on their infrared pods, the at-flare pods, which is an indication there's something physical out there in the airspace. So they're capturing on both systems, which is curious. In addition to that, they're not seeing them with their eyeballs. So there's two things to think about there. One, why aren't they seeing them visually? Well, Ryan says that essentially what he believes is going on is that as they approach them within visual range, before they reach visual range, these things are dropping altitude. As you approach them, they're below your visual sight. They're still within your radar sector, the cell of the radar. When you reach merge plot, you don't know where they are. And they're basically dropped below you, so you can't visually see them. The turn radius on an F-18 is something like 4,000 feet. And it cost $55,000 for 1 hour, to run those things for 1 hour.
A drop in the bucket for our $1 trillion military budget.
Fair enough, but they do have a budget, and they have to account for it, right. And they're there for a mission. They're there to train for their deployment, and, you better have a damn good reason to turn your plane around in middle of an exercise to go look at something that may or may not be there.
Right. I mean, I can see that. Plus, I mean, probably these guys don't want to have to explain why they made that turn, to their superiors, who apparently don't want to believe UFOs exist. And, because I heard even when David Fravor, the pilot that you see that talks about the Tic Tac UFO back in 2004, apparently when he got back to the Nimitz, there was a bunch of guys wearing tinfoil hats and all kinds of stuff and, making fun of him. When they got back. And I mean, and that's just the reaction you're going to get.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's why these pilots haven't been reporting them and why their superiors don't want to know about it. It's like, don't tell me about a UFO. I don't want to, we're not going down the X-Files path here. We've got a job to do.
So there's
UFOs don't fit into their game plan.
That's right. So there's a couple of interesting things that happened during this time that we probably should bring up. One is that advancement in the radar systems that were on the F-18s themselves occurred during this period of time. And it was after they upgraded the F-18s to that AN/APG-79 radar from the 73 that they started picking these things up. So it could be a sensor issue, right? Either a bug in the sensors, that's one way to look at it, or maybe the sensors, the older sensors, were incapable of picking up because they didn't have a sufficient level of technology to pick up these things that are out there. So there's one of two ways to look at it, I think.
That is what I think is most likely, because if you recall on the Nimitz encounter, the only one that was able to pick up the objects that were there was the newly designed Aegis radar systems. And the onboard radars of the Super Hornets at that time didn't have the sophistication to be able to pick up these UFOs. In fact, the Aegis, they were going to hand it off to the E2 Hawkeye.
That's right.
And the Hawkeye couldn't pick them up on their radar system either.
They couldn't get a consistent lock. It was intermittent is the way they described it. Now, that was the E2C Hawkeye. In the Nimitz encounter, actually, they had an upgraded E2D, which had additional electronic surveillance and electronic countermeasures and radar. So the curious thing about the Roosevelt encounters is we have no detail from any of the other people on any of the ships or on this new E2D Hawkeye. So we don't have collaborating evidence. We just have really out there in the space that is accessible to us the accounts from Ryan Graves and Danny Acoin.
It's my guess that they are the military, the Pentagon, are worried about revealing too many capabilities, which is a good thing. And probably you haven't had a lot of eyewitness testimony from anyone, because I'd say a lot are active military still, if they're officers. That would be my guess, is why we're not really hearing from a lot of people on that right yet. But now I do know that some of the people in ATIP talked to some of the pilots that haven't come forward, or at least gone public, I should say.
That's right.
And some of the other people involved, just to discuss it and see what they could learn from it. The thing about gimbal, when you watch that, what's some of the critical stuff? Because I know gimbal, when you take a look at that, there's, the reason it's called gimbal is because actually the camera's probably rotating. It may not actually be the object rotating, because there's a camera gimbal
exactly. They pretty much were able to rule out that the gimbal itself was causing that rotation, that the rotation was actually done by the object itself. There's a couple of curious things about the object, and it's worth noting all of these things. You sort of have to take it all in and talk about, specifics, so you're getting the full picture. And I think that's one of the complaints. So Mick West, I really want to drive this point home. So there's Mick West and Ryan Graves. Now, Ryan Graves, without naming Mick, but he sort of talks about Mick without naming him and saying these armchair debunkers. And I'm really pretty sure he's talking about Mick. So what Mick does, Mick West, he has a website where he goes over various things in the UFO community, and particularly these videos is probably where he's become most famous. And he talks about all three of these videos that were released along with the 2017 New York Times reporting. And let's just take one in particular. Let's take the Go Fast video, because I think this is the one that has the best information, where if you take it in isolation, the video that was released to the public, the information on the screen there, with basic trigonometry, you can ascertain many things about that object that's being picked up on that FLIR pod. You can pick up how far it is between the plane that's observing it and the surface of the water. You can determine its airspeed. You can determine its approximate side and estimate that. And you can come up with a margin of error as well based on how the plane was flying. So really, with basic trigonometry for the Go Fast video, you can ascertain it's about at 13,000 feet. You can ascertain that it's probably about 20 feet, I think they said, at most in size, maybe less, about the size of a balloon. And I hate to say that, but there you have it. And that it is approximately going the same speed as the wind at that altitude. And it's essentially a classic case of parallax. So with the Go Fast video, if you take it in isolation, there's probably a pretty reasonable explanation for that. Now, that's Mick West looking at that particular video. But Ryan Graves has some counterpoints, which I think we need to take into account, because Mick is just looking at that video and really discounting in all three videos the pilots that are observing these things and are recording them, and who are familiar with the systems that they're utilizing to do this. And Ryan's point is simply that you're looking at things in isolation and you're discounting a lot of other information that's not available to you. So for you to come up with a result that indicates something that's pretty prosaic is not essentially the right way to go about this from his standpoint, and that we should take more time to gather more information, and of the information that's available to the military but not available to the rest of the public, look at that and get to the bottom of exactly what's going on. I think that's important to look at. So that's pretty much the Go Fast video. The Gimbal video is interesting too, and we can talk about that a little bit if you want.
Well, I was going to say and I've watched that video that Mick West has on that, and it certainly makes some sense.
On that specific video, I can crunch the math myself, and it's pretty compelling. Assuming that those systems are accurately reporting the information and that the interpretations are correct. Mixed dead on. That's a balloon
or something like that. Then
it's something in the air that's not likely to that has the possibility, a very likely possibility, to have a more mundane explanation to it. That doesn't mean that it 100% discounts the possibility of some intelligently controlled vehicle. Doesn't remove that 100%. You can't, not with the information that's available in that video. But you can come up with a lot of other explanations that fit the data that's available to you that are a little bit more mundane.
So what you got to say on the gimbal?
The gimbal's a little bit more interesting. So they're seeing these things very often, and they're at 13,000 feet or so for 12 hours at a time. There are no flight control surfaces, no exhaust plumes. They pick them up on radar and with the FLIR pods. They're approximately 20 to 40 feet long in size. It makes you really wonder exactly what they're seeing. They're not seeing them with their eyeballs, but you've got to also understand that these radar systems operate at up to 150 kilometers, which is, what's that, 0.6? What is it? 1 kilometer is like 0.6 miles.
0.62.
So it's like 93 miles, if my math is right, something like that. So at 93 miles is the distance that they're seeing these things at. So they're not within visual range at that distance if they're at the extreme point of that distance. And then as they approach them, if they're dropping below visual range, these guys are flying 28,000 feet, something like that. And these things drop to 13,000 feet. It's very possible they're not even able to get a visual eyes on them just because they're dropping below what they're able to see visually. I looked it up, and I think Ryan had mentioned that at that height, they would sometimes see these things go at 240 knots, something like that. And at the altitude that they were observing them, that's actually wind speed. But here's the kicker. They're stationary with the wind at that speed. And they're going against the wind, not with it. So I think that rules out the balloon, which is my favorite thing, everybody knows.
Apparently the Air Force's favorite thing, too.
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say it's not a balloon. And another thing Ryan said in one of his conversations on another podcast, I can't remember the name of the podcast, but I'll try to put that link up on our site. You know, I'm all for supporting other podcasts, particularly if they're doing stuff interesting. And this was a really interesting interview with him. He had said that these things would set in there with the wind going, 200 knots or so, 130 to 200 knots. It would set there stationary and spin, and they would see 3 or 4 of these things that were smaller behind it, and they would break away from it, and that thing would be moving against the wind and then stop and wait. And then these other items these other 3 or 4, 5 or 6 would come when they did their turn and went away. They would come back, and once they grouped up again, they would then proceed in that same direction the larger vehicle or larger target was going. I don't call it a vehicle because we don't know what it is. But
once again, on their mysterious mission, doing who knows what.
Exactly.
Yeah, these are the more compelling videos than, of course, the FLIR video. But then we have the great eyewitness testimony of David Fravor on that one. The gimbal video is the most compelling. You can just see the most detail, I think, of that craft. And I've been watching it while you've been talking, just over and over, especially when he goes from, I guess, the one field of, I'm not sure what, but goes a different type of setting to where it sort of looks reversed, type of infrared setting or something.
Yeah, so they have
see it much more clearly.
Right, so they have 2 or 3 different magnification levels that you can go in on that. And that particular video has the deepest magnification you can go. I think it's 2x or something like that. And then they have the capability to flip between white hot and black hot. And that was one of the complaints. So Mick originally had said maybe it's a bird. So talking about the Go Fast video. But you can see that on the screen there, you get an indication that it's set to white hot. And the object is black, or maybe vice versa. I can't remember which it was, but showing that the object that was flying was colder than the background ocean temperature, and there's no bird that cold. That's where he got in a little trouble, but it could be any mundane object that is in the air at that level, be it a balloon, my favorite thing, or something else that just floats in the air. Who knows? That could go with wind speed, essentially. So it's still possible, but there you have it. You do have this sensor that's picking this, regardless. In the Go Fast video and in the gimbal video and even the FLIR video, you're picking these things up with multiple electronic systems. You have to take that into account. You just can't brush away that or the experience of the pilots who've been operating these systems for a significant amount of time. I mean, they just don't hand this over to Joe down at the donut shop. Yeah,
that's right.
There's significant amount of training.
I got to interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
I locked up there for a few minutes. I don't know if I look frozen to you.
Nope.
And realized that I have not been recording since about 1:05. That mine stopped working. Tell me you're recording my side.
I am recording your side. What are you doing, drugs over there?
No, it was weird when I clicked on the, it's the government again, man. When I clicked on the Go Fast video, everything locked up and my recording stopped and everything. I'm telling you, man, it's the government. We're being monitored by the NSA right now as we're recording this. They don't want this podcast to go out. They don't want it out there.
I was talking to Edward Snowden last night, and he told me this might happen.
Yeah. Gonna have to go move to Russia.
Don't even joke about that. Have you ever tried speaking Russian, man? That stuff's hard.
Russian, difficult language.
No по-русски язык.
Not easy to learn for the newcomer.
What did I learn in Russian? No по-русски язык. I don't speak Russian. I did take it for two semesters in college.
Really?
Well, I was a linguistics major originally, believe it or not.
Wow.
One semester away from graduating.
Strange.
And I switched my majors. Well, not so strange, because when I started looking for a job, I found out how much they made and what my competition looked like, and I was like, maybe I should try something else.
Learned Russian. He's pretty good at it, but then it was like he couldn't find any work anywhere. I mean, there's just diplomatic work and that kind of stuff.
And then
really the only thing.
They hire people who were raised in a multi-linguistic family who already speak it fluently from birth. Yeah, we had those people in my classes. You can't compete.
Anyway, where were we?
We were actually going to get ready to talk a little bit about the gimbal video. And I think we're in the middle of talking about that, but really I want to move on to some really interesting theories brought up to what might be going on in terms of weapon platforms. Now, Ryan Graves did not ever say that he thought this was aliens, or that it was alien craft, or that it was extraterrestrial in any way, shape, or form.
Remind me again, he's the pilot, correct?
He's one of the two pilots that have gone on the record about what went on with the Roosevelt encounters over the course of those 2 years. Now, they weren't there for the full 2 years. He was there probably for 2014. He may have already been deployed by 2015, but certainly kept in touch with the pilots. He recognized the voice of the pilots who recorded the two videos. He was not the one who recorded either one of those videos, but he knows the pilots who did.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I've heard they've tried to get them to come forward, but they've chosen not to.
Yeah,
which I can't really blame them.
Yeah, can you blame them, right?
Was one thing I was going to point out. The same pilot and weapons specialist recorded both videos.
Oh, that I didn't know.
The voice sounds the same. So I think that's worth noting.
Yeah, that's something I didn't know. So that's good to...
I mean, did you not notice that?
I honestly didn't pay attention.
Nickel 6-1 Tango, Roger, over. Oh, got it! Woohoo! Roger, there's troubleshooting. What the fuck is that? Did you box moving target?
No, I took an auto track.
Oh, okay.
Oh my gosh, dude.
Wow, look at the fly!
Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
My gosh.
They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS, though, is it? It's not.
That is the LNS, dude.
Well, if there's like...
Look at that thing.
It's rotating.
I think the voice sounds the same.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is the same two guys. At least one of them sounds very much alike. I know those two videos were taken a couple of weeks apart, I think, in 2015. But yeah, I think you're right. Same two dudes. So I'm getting ready to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here for you.
All right, I'm ready, man.
It's going to be something you're going to love, I
got
think.
my rabbit hole and gear on.
I'm going to be really impressed if you know some of these planes. Now,
okay.
Now, I know you're going to know one of them because everybody knows one of them, particularly X-Men fans.
I don't know anything about the X-Men comic book stuff.
Oh, you're going to know this one. There's speculation on what actually might be occurring with both the Nimitz encounter and the Roosevelt encounter. And it starts with a CIA operative named T.D. Barnes. And he starts his journey in black projects back in the 1954 as a young Army radar systems officer.
Wow, man, we're going way back. We're stepping into the way back machine.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. It goes way back and moves all the way up to modern times. It starts out in the 1960s where Barnes is whisked away by the Central Intelligence Agency to work on Project Oxcart. Are you familiar with this?
Whisked away.
Whisked away.
Project Oxcart is that the spy plane stuff?
That's right, the A-12 spy plane.
Mm-hmm. Which became the SR-71 Blackbird.
Wow, I am impressed. I wasn't sure you were going to get that. I knew you would know what the SR-71 is, but I didn't know that you would be aware that
originally it was the A-12.
That's right, the successor, and
probably the fastest aircraft ever built that's actually been piloted. Not counting a rocket plane like the X-15 or something like that, but.
So the CIA launched this audacious program to develop a technology that could electronically generate and interject false targets.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about that before, Project Nemesis.
Right. Now, the original project, back in the time where we're doing this A-12 precursor to the SR-71, it was codenamed Palladium. It's really interesting that one of the things they did with the Palladium to test it was they actually set up a test case with Soviet radar systems that were located in Havana at the time during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they projected false radar of a fighter jet coming out of Key West. They also had a sub down by Cuba in the bay there that would release balloons to give more physical targets for the radar system. And then they use this radar spoofing or this radar projecting capability to project this imaginary fighter coming from Key West, flying down to Havana and giving real radar target hits off of these balloons that were releasing out of these subs. What they learned from that experience was that based on the way they developed the spy plane, that the radar that the Russians employed would be able to pick it up. And that allowed them to redesign it and create the SR-71, which was able, I guess, to beat it, or at least was better than the A-12.
A little history for you. The SR-71 was built at Groom Lake, Area 51, by the Skunk Works, and the predecessor to the SR-71 was really the U-2 spy plane. The thing about that aircraft was it flew extremely high. Very high, like 70,000 feet. And there was nothing else that could fly really that high other than maybe experimental aircraft or anything. And so we flew over Russia with it all the time, over the Soviet Union, to check out their, count how many bombers they have and take photographs and understand what their offensive and defensive capabilities were. In the early 1960s, I want to say 1961, Francis Gary Powers was piloting the U-2 spy plane. Now, this was all classified at the time. No one in the general public, no one knew this aircraft even existed other than the CIA and obviously some intelligence people. And it was shot down by a Russian surface-to-air missile. It became a big public thing. Here's America spying on Russia and everything. And Powers bailed out and was a prisoner of the Soviets for a while, and I think was exchanged for some other spies or something like that. So that's the thing about the SR-71 was that it could fly extremely high as well, but it was very fast, very fast. 5 or 6 times the speed of sound. Here's an interesting thing. The body was made of titanium, which is a very rare element.
Expensive.
And exactly. And that there was so much thermal dynamics, there was so much heating that went on the skin of that aircraft that when it was sitting on the runway and they put fuel in it, the fuel would leak out of it. As they would be fueling the aircraft and fuel would be leaking out of it as it was being fueled. But then once the airplane took off and was in its cruising speed, the aircraft actually expanded by, I forget how much. I mean, it actually, the length of the aircraft grew and it sealed all those fuel tanks.
That's crazy.
Because of it heated up so much because of the friction.
I wouldn't want to be fueling that.
Even at 70,000 feet.
That's one way to quit smoking.
Yeah.
Be responsible for fuel in that plane.
I mean, could you imagine that? I mean, you could fly from, I think they did, when they were retiring that aircraft, they flew from New York to LA or vice versa, and in like an hour or something. I mean, it was just crazy. And of course, the full capabilities were classified for a very long time. But of course, now we have satellites. We don't need anything like that. And the YouTube, as long as we're talking about spy planes, another interesting thing that some of the guys in Project Blue Book knew about, but was classified and they couldn't talk about. When the U-2 spy plane, if you see one now, you'll see it with the extra fuel pods and it's black. And that's because it has radar absorbing paint on it now, even though it's, you know, if you see it, they were using them for something a few years ago, but they're retired now. But at the time, they were polished aluminum, very highly classified aircraft. And so they did notice a big spike in UFO reports whenever they started flying the U-2 spy plane, because the polished aluminum would reflect the sun and it would be very high. It'd be like 70,000 feet, you know, a good 40,000 feet above where any commercial airliner would be flying.
You know, this reminds me of something David Fravor shared in one of his interviews. He said when they were out flying, you know, over the desert, they would see campfires of people out in the desert camping.
Mm-hmm.
And they would, this is awesome, they would fly their jets down. They'd cut the engines and just glide in right above their things and then turn it vertical and then fire off their jets and take off straight up.
Oh my God.
And he said, it's like they would do, that was just something that fighter pilots did for fun. And
for fun. Freak out a bunch of people trying to camp in the desert.
They're basically
people.
Yeah, they're
talking about a UFO sighting. You know,
exactly.
Yeah,
they were propagating the UFO mythology.
Yeah, no kidding.
Fantastic.
That's pretty cool, though. Anyway, a little bit of U2 and SR-71 little trivia for you.
Deep dive trivia. So what's really interesting about this interview with T.D. Barnes is that in both instances, in 2004 and in 2014 and 15, the carrier groups underway were equipped with revolutionary new systems that would give huge leaps in networked air defense capabilities.
Manufactured by the Raytheon Corporation.
Darn tootin'. Raytheon, give me a call for sponsorship. And anyway, and many of the Super Hornets gained significantly new upgrades in their active electronically scanned array. That's the AESA. And in one of those videos, the gimbal video, you can hear the pilot reference that they can see more.
Right.
Yeah, more unidentified objects on the AESA. Barnes believes that the deployment of these new technology to be the key of what he thinks is likely behind the UFO encounters with the Navy. And that's essentially that there's probably something like Project Paladin or Project Nemesis, which we'll get into in just a second, which really could be what is going on here, where they're testing this technology against the pilots, both in the 2004 and the 2014 and 15. A lot of people are against this, saying that there's no way that the military would test these things and not include the pilots in on the test. Now, Barnes seems to think that's not the case, and there were several cases he talked about, particularly in terms of like the MiG-21. They would have cases where they would have pilots fly against it in test runs without telling them the details of what was going on. Mm. So it's not like it's unprecedented. And given that the upper command seemed not quite as concerned, that could be the reason why, is because people at the captain or admiral level were aware of the test, but no one else was, particularly in the 2004 Nimitz case, where you had all of the data collected immediately after the event.
Yeah, that's what we talked about in that episode, too. I find that to be plausible. Again, you have Fravor's testimony. I mean, it's if you totally disregard what he said because he had eyes on it. And not only him now, Alex, the other pilots come forward as well and given eyewitness testimony that they actually saw the Tic Tac object. The only issue I have with that is the gimbal video just really looks like a real object. And of course, now it's supposed to look like a real object, right? I don't know. I mean, I guess it's possible, but again, we have some eyewitness testimony of an object that came relatively close to visual on a UAP, right?
Yeah.
So the cube or the cube within the sphere.
So there's actually a patent that someone located. It's patent number 2,463,517. It's called the Airborne Corner Reflector. It's a radar reflector inside of a weather balloon. And the intent of this was to protect the radar reflector and provide a little bit more maneuverability. There's subsequent ones where they actually have engines attached to the balloons themselves so that they can actually fly around to some degree. And it really looks, I mean, if you look at the diagram that's part of the patent, it looks exactly what was described by the pilots. And what's interesting about this is this patent was filed back in 1945.
Wow.
Right. So who knows? There's definitely, human beings are very clever, and sometimes I don't think we give them enough credit.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows? Maybe there's something to that. You can't rule it out completely.
One thing I don't like the idea that we would deploy drones, though, anywhere near where our pilots would be training. I don't like the idea, and I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't like the idea that they would place our pilots in harm's way and take a chance on that without them being aware that these things would be out there. On the other hand, if they're some kind of super top secret drone that are being developed that we definitely don't want our enemies knowing about, maybe they are. Something like that. And especially when you look at Gimbal looks so much like a real object. I mean, the other one's FLIR, it's very blurry, right on the edge of the range of the FLIR pod back in those days. And then the Go Fast it kind of looks like a Tic Tac, I guess. Just don't really see any features. But on the Gimbal video, you see a lot of features on that one, I think. Especially when they flip to the other, what is it called? The White Hot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What's your take on these? What do you think? Have you got more stuff there on them?
I don't. Really, I'm a big fan of the scientific method. And at the end of the day, this is the biggest problem with UFOs, right? Because if you look at the scientific method, you essentially have an observation. You formulate a question about that observation. And then you come up with a hypothesis and then a prediction. And then you test that prediction and then you iterate. The problem with UFOs is in that iteration phase, and to some degree in the observation phase. So how much information you have coming into the observation phase. So you see a strange light in the sky. That's your observation. And then your question is, let's say it's pretty broad. Is that a UFO?
Well, when you say UFO, I'm assuming you mean something other
than an alien
craft.
craft.
An unidentified flying object. Is this a flying saucer, let's say?
Yeah, is it a flying saucer? And then you come up with a prediction. Well, if it's a flying saucer, then what? I mean, what is a flying saucer? What would constitute a flying saucer? I mean, that is just an open-ended kind of thing. It's really hard to test that, and it's really hard to replicate that test, if not impossible. So it becomes very difficult to study this using the scientific method without some ability to do that iteration part of the scientific method. Now, in the case of Mick West and in isolation looking at the Go Fast video, there's stuff there you can test. There's data you can test, and to some degree, to a limited degree. And if you say, these are the parameters under which I'm conducting the test, you can come up with a prediction that if this were a mundane object, it would have X, Y, and Z characteristics. And then you can test that to a limited degree. And then you can narrow it down and say, well, it's obviously not a Boeing 737 because at that distance, at that height, at the speed it was going, there's no way it'd stay in the air, or there's no way it would be flying that way, or there's no way it would be that size. I mean, you can limit and narrow down the possibilities. But at the end of the day, you're still left scratching your head saying it still could be some alien craft. It could be some mundane object. And that's really the difficult thing for me with all of these things, is that you're so limited in being able to apply the scientific method to find it because there's just not enough data.
I think that's been the problem with this whole subject. When we look at the things that were going on in the 40s and 50s, they were being taken much more seriously, at least much more openly by the government until after the Robertson panel. When we look at it then, I mean, most of the scientists there's nothing to study. That's why they're like, there's nothing to be gained because it's just vapor. There's nothing they can put their hands on. The only thing you can really do, which is what J. Allen Hynek talked a lot about, even Jacques Vallée, who was the first one to really put together a big database of all these sightings, is the frequency of the sightings, the characteristics of the craft when they're seen, the visible traces that are often left, and sometimes, just like that report talked about that I was talking about early in the podcast, the effects they can have on human beings, being near one, having a true close encounter, being close to one of these craft, is apparently unhealthy in some cases. Many sightings, they have some type of disruptive effect on automobiles and radios. And so obviously it's some kind of EMF or some type of radio frequency, the same as they're talking about in that paper. So that's the only thing you can study. You can study some trace elements or some trace evidence that's left behind. You can study the frequency, and then you're just left with talking to a lot of people that are untrained, not professional observers about what they saw.
Yeah, most scientists too, and this is a good point to bring up as well, is observations made by human beings are considered crap by most scientists. And the reason for that is that there are large studies over decades, 30 plus years, psychologists who have studied the observational efficacy of human beings and find it significantly lacking. And that makes some people who observe UFOs really upset because they're sure of what they've seen, particularly in cases of a close encounter. I mean, like something you've seen within like 15 feet. Let's say 20 feet, Travis Walton, for example. Or even those guys who were within, 30 yards of it.
I think they were like 50 feet away, something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe 100 feet away, but they were relatively close to the UFO.
100 feet, 30 yards, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's pretty darn close. And
very close.
And, you're observing this thing with your eyeballs, and it's very distinct to you, and then someone comes up and say, you're a shit observer. That's not going to sit too well with you. But there's 30 years of data that prove that in overall, if you're looking at the curve, the majority of people observing it.
That's all you have.
That's all you have, and it's not good enough. It's not good enough for scientists, nor should it be. We need more data, and we need a more serious look at this, and we probably need more resources and equipment to look at our skies and pay attention to it.
With all this being said, maybe, who knows if we'll see anything next month and when this big report comes out. I'm hoping we get to see some more videos, though. That's what I'm really hoping for. I mean, I like to read the reports, and they're cool, but there's a zillion reports out there. Really what gets you excited is to watch something like the Gimbal video, and watch it and just look at it over and over and think, what is that thing? And listen to the excitement of the pilots and everything. They are very excited and that it is something unusual.
I do think scientists too often underestimate the value of pilots and their ability to understand what they're seeing on their systems and interpret the data accurately. I understand that, yes, they're still human beings and they still can stretch the observations or put those observations into the bucket of, I don't understand what this is, therefore it must be an alien UFO. But that doesn't seem to be the case. They don't make that leap. They just make the leap of it's a physical object. It's out there in space. Like Ryan Graves never says that. Matter of fact, he indicates that from his perspective, it's probably some kind of weapons platform. But that they need to be made aware of it if they're doing training in the same area as that weapons platform, whether it's domestic or foreign, so that there's no accidents for the pilots. And that's perfectly reasonable.
I agree with that. And again, that's why I have a hard time believing, despite what this old CIA agent mentioned, I have a hard time believing they would deploy that within an active training ground. Maybe they would, but I also think the CIA was a lot shadier organization back in the 50s when this guy was an active field agent than they are now.
I don't know.
I'm not saying they're not doing underhanded things, but they used to. Too many things have come out about what the CIA and our government did to U.S. citizens and experimented on them with radiation
and acid.
And when that stuff comes up, that is a really big embarrassment for our country. That's why I think they're more careful now about that sort of thing. You don't think so?
No, I watched Under Siege the other night with Steven Seagal, and I don't trust those CIA guys at all, man.
What's up with you and Steven Seagal, man? It's like 2 weeks in a row you've mentioned Steven Seagal.
I don't know. It's just such a funny guy. He cracks me up.
Pretty cool movie, though.
It is a cool movie, man.
Hey, you know what? Actually, I've got, I think I've got that on DVD. My son liked that movie quite a bit. I think he got it. It's laying around here somewhere. I think I have everything. It's like you were talking about Communion a couple episodes ago and a couple of those books. I'm like, yeah, they're on my bookshelf.
You're like Warehouse 13, but for, mundane objects.
Yeah. And Steven Seagal movies.
And Steven Seagal movies.
All right, man. We got anything else on the Roosevelt or anything? Man, I don't know. One of these days, I'm going to have to stick to one subject when we do these.
Yeah, remember I said earlier this week we were going to keep this short. There wasn't much to it, and we're at 2+ hours.
Oh, and of course, what did I say? I said, don't worry. Once we start talking, it'll be 2 hours. So
that's right.
Don't worry about it.
It's that Dark Shadow stuff. It eats up like half an hour.
There's so much to this, and that's part of my problem is Jimmy and I will pick a subject early in the week, read about it, and I'll learn some about it and everything. But then all of a sudden, I'll be thinking about something else. Like he made a comment to me about polygraphs because we talked about it so much with the Travis Walton thing. And then he said, Bob Lazar passed a polygraph. And then I'm like, I got to read all about Bob Lazar again. I haven't read about him for a long time. So, I had to go down that rabbit hole. Plus, I'm reading all these scientific papers by Jacques Vallée because I'm still trying to formulate in my mind, what can UFOs be? What are they? Who are they? When you look at these craft, it's sort of like J. Allen Hynek said, because he's the one that came up with the scale, the close encounter scale, close encounters of the first kind, close encounters of the second kind, so on and so forth. He, in the book, states that he was uncomfortable even thinking about close encounters of the third kind. In other words, he really liked the idea of studying the crafts and the fact that UFOs existed and that they landed and all the other kind of stuff. But he was kind of uncomfortable thinking about the occupants of those craft. So when we see them, they're one of two things, right? If they really are some type of spacecraft or craft or vehicle from somewhere else, they are either remote control, automated, like our Mars rovers or something like that, or they're piloted by someone, right? So someone's in it.
You know what cracks me? You know what cracks me up about that?
Who is it?
Yeah, this is what cracks me up about that. Is scientists will say, all right, so you're going to start assuming all these characteristics of aliens coming to visit us. Well, I mean, why would they be even interested into us? I mean, what makes us think that they would be an advanced civilization in any way, shape, or be interested in us? And what makes you think that they would behave in a way where they wouldn't come down and just say hi to us, or that they would care whether they saw us or not? And there's a double standard there, right? Because they're saying they wouldn't. We know what an advanced spacefaring race would do. They wouldn't do the things you say they would do. They would do the things I say they would do.
Right.
And that always cracked me up. I just love it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I know that's the biggest argument that a lot of skeptics have against alien visitation is why are they picking somebody up like Betty and Barney Hill and studying them or whatever they're doing. And then sometimes UFO occupants have been seeing like shovels, like they're taking a soil sample or something. Seriously, people have seen this or believe they've seen it.
Sure.
But then on the other hand, and it's something that Jacques Vallée and even J. Allen Hynek talked about somewhat, is if they are just visiting us for some kind of survey and they don't want to interfere with our society, our normal development, what have you, right? Is why they haven't landed on the White House and said, hey, take me to your leader, is because it's some kind of scientific survey. It's like, why are there so many sightings? Why are they still here? Why do we see them all the time? Why are they still doing things? Why are, it's like they've been here plenty long enough to have done some type of scientific survey and then move on to the next planet. I don't know. And then, of course, a lot of people believe, and this idea was first voiced way back in the 40s, that somehow this spacefaring race detected our atomic bombs that we started experimenting with in 1945, and then they show up on the scene in 1947, so as if it maybe took them a couple years to detect it and to get here or something like that. But that's what a lot of people still believe. A lot of people in the field think that aliens are concerned with our aggressiveness and that we still have this military posture. I mean, if you were to look at the Earth from outside right now, I mean, what would you really see? You would still see all these ICBMs. I mean, we say the Cold War is over, but we're still pointing all kinds of ICBMs at each other. We're ready to launch those things at a moment's notice. The President of the United States has someone that goes with him in his entourage at all times with what they call the football. And what the football is a briefcase with all the launch codes in it.
Here's what I think is that, did you ever see the picture that, I can't remember, Cassini maybe, or maybe it was even Voyager. One of the ships took a picture of the Earth from like a vast distance.
Voyager 2.
And
they took it when they were way past, I think after it passed Neptune. They were going to shut the camera down. Neptune was really the last thing that it could see.
Right.
It wasn't going anywhere near Pluto. So they were going to shut it down to save energy.
Right.
And so, I think it was actually Carl Sagan that talked them into turning it around and take that picture of the Earth from the longest distance that it's ever been. And it's just a little tiny blue speck and the totally black sky.
My favorite picture.
Yeah, it's great.
It's my favorite picture of the Earth because it really, for me, cemented this idea that we really are this really insignificant dot in the vastness of the void. What would a spacefaring race be bothered with this dot in the middle? But at the same time, I'm essentially a monkey. If let's say this spacefaring race has existed just 1 million years beyond where we are now. They were at our technology level, and then they exceeded that by 1 million years. There is no way that I can understand a human race that's 1 million years beyond where we are right now, much less an alien race. And to try to apply some human characteristics to an alien race and try to understand why they would do anything with this planet is ridiculous from my perspective. I could be wrong, but
if they're alien, we can't begin to guess their motivations because we're being completely ethnocentric if we're going to try and put ourselves in their shoes. They're an alien race with their alien motivations. Let's go down that rabbit hole of they see how violent the human race is. What if they're not 1 million years ahead of us? What if they're really only a couple of 100 years ahead of us, which is a statistical almost impossibility? So we've developed nuclear weapons, and we have a lot of them, quite a few of them. We've spent a ton of money, a lot of resources of our planet have went into developing weapon systems. Fair?
Yeah.
What if we actually are on the doorstep of discovering how to do interstellar travel? Because, I mean, if you think about it, then they would be concerned. Now, if they were looking at our level of technology and saying the best thing they have are chemical rockets, and all they can do is maybe get to the moon, they can launch probes to all their solar planets, but there's no way they can't even reach their next interstellar neighbor, which is 4.5 light years away. It would take 30,000 years for their fastest moving spacecraft to even get there, right?
Right.
But what if I put myself in the shoes of Thomas Jefferson, for instance? And he was a pretty intelligent person. But do you think Thomas Jefferson could have imagined what the world would look like 200 years, just 200 years beyond when he lived?
Right.
Right. I mean, I just don't think I just think that would be beyond their capability to understand anything. I mean, we didn't even understand what fusion power was until the 1930s, and 10 years later, we're making atomic weapons. And then another 10 years after that, we're making fusion weapons. We're making hydrogen bombs. And we didn't even know what fusion was 20 or 25 years before that.
Yeah.
My point is, it seems impossible because space is vast. We can't underestimate that. Space is gigantic, bigger than you can wrap your mind around.
It's
Our
infinite.
galaxy's bigger than you can wrap your mind around. So you can't, and like you like to say, you can, but the idea of interstellar travel is not an easy problem to solve based on the laws of physics as we know them. But what if we really are, as a civilization, or these aliens see us as a civilization that's probably right on the verge of making a breakthrough discovery into those wormholes, or some type of interstellar medium that we're unaware of, or some way of being able to travel to the stars? Then maybe we would be a problem for the interstellar community.
Sure. So there's Neil deGrasse is on podcast with Joe Rogan. Now, in some previous ones and some previous interviews with Neil, there's two things I want to cover here. First is somebody asked Neil what keeps him awake at night. You know, what concerns him, and he said two things over the course of multiple interviews. The first was that when he looks up at the night sky, there's a certain portion of the sky that is accelerating beyond our view, and that data is lost to us forever once it accelerates past, a certain point. So we're losing a bit of the sky essentially every night. And as an astronomer, that's something that bothers him. But the other thing that I thought was very interesting was that if there is alien life, he looks at it like this. We are essentially 99%, chimps or gorillas are 99% in every way, like biology, chromosomes and genes and stuff, 99%, just 1% shy of us. There's a 1% difference, essentially, between us and chimps. And his worry is that there's an alien race out there that's 1% smarter than us. And he's like, look how we treat chimps and gorillas.
That's a good point.
Why would an alien race that's just 1% smarter than us have any concern for our well-being? So who knows? And then Joe Rogan made a really good point because somebody asked him, he says, why would they even care about us? Why would they even be interested in us? And he said, well, so recently we discovered that there are chimps in the jungle who are using tools really in an advanced way that we haven't seen chimps do before, imitating humans that they're seeing in villages and stuff to manipulate their environment, much like we imagine early man used to do. And it fascinates us, and we take time out of our day. Scientists take time out of their day to observe this, record it, and understand it. It says, for an alien race, we just might be those chimps with the sticks trying to get ants out of a log,
Yeah.
But we're working with nuclear bombs. And he says, I can't help but think that's got to be incredibly fascinating to an alien race. Look at all of these hairless chimps working with nuclear bombs.
It could be.
Right.
I mean, it could be that very thing. Who knows? And I've thought too, what if, because they do seem very interested in most of the sightings, for instance. Most of the sightings happen around these military bases that we've been told. And they also happen a lot around industrial places, right? Like the things that make our economy, our logistics and things go, makes our world go. In fact, if there's a big city that doesn't have an industrial base, they don't have as many sightings as a big city that has a big industrial base. That tells me that whoever they are interested in our industrial base, our weapon systems, those sort of things, right? Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Could be a bad thing if they're planning on a takeover. This is where they, refine fuel. They use fuel in all those vehicles we see going around all over the place. This is where it comes from. I mean, look at what happened just a couple of weeks ago. Somebody cyber attacked a freaking fuel pipeline and shut down the East Coast practically. I mean, all they need to do is a cyber attack and you'll shut the U.S. down anyway.
If you have equipment to traverse vast distances of space, all you do is drop an asteroid on us and then come down with your advanced ships and, mine whatever you want.
Right, whatever it is. But one thing I've kind of thought about, so I've heard people say, okay, the Earth's only 4.5 billion years old. The universe we believe to be something like 12 or 13 billion, 13.6 billion years, I think.
13.6. 13.5 is what I heard the other day for a guy giving an astronomy lecture, but let's say 13.6.
So in other words, our planetary system, the Earth and the Sun, is kind of a newcomer to the universe compared to some other stars and planets and things. And so a lot of people say, well, maybe one of those civilizations could even be billions of years advanced over us. And if that were true, think about this. So all of the heavy elements in our planet were forged in the heart of a sun, right? Because, you start with hydrogen, creates helium, so on and so forth, and breaks down, gets down to the core, and it fuses these heavy elements. And it has to be a really big sun to do it, especially when you get down to an element like uranium, which is a very, very heavy element, okay? But it's also unstable and it's radioactive. That's one reason we can make bombs with them, right? All the neutrons that are escaping because it's radioactive will create a chain reaction if you get enough uranium-235 together. Or you have plutonium, which is a byproduct of a nuclear reaction, which is an even heavier element. So what I'm getting at, what if this race of space travelers, they've never seen nuclear reaction, other than they are aware that fusion happens in a sun, but a sun has all this super heavy gravity. And they're like, they've got this element on this planet and they've created weapons with them. If your planet that you came from didn't have those super heavy elements that we have on our planet, in our system, then you may not even be aware of it. Or maybe you're aware that that radioactive element exists, but it never occurred to you to experiment with it in such a way to create this nuclear reaction.
I think if you're going to speculate based on assumptions, you can create whatever assumptions you want and speculate away.
It's just something I thought about. I heard somebody make that comment that maybe they've been around for billions of years longer than even our planet was around. Then I thought, well, then a lot of the heavier elements wouldn't have been available to their planetary system as they are ours, because it takes time and it has to be forged in a star that's very large, much larger than our sun, to get those heavy elements. And it has to go supernova and spread all those elements out into the ether, into space, and then coalesce into another planetary system.
Nerd.
That's what you always say. Come on, man.
Well, when you get all,
Well, actually. You push my glasses up when I say that. Do we have anything else we want to talk about tonight? We certainly went down a couple of rabbit holes. I hope listeners have enjoyed tonight's episode and gotten a few things out of it. If you have any questions, any corrections, or if you want to tell me to stick to the subject, anything like that, just reach out to us at firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Please remember to rate and review the podcast if you like what you hear. And again, thank you to all the listeners that have already subscribed and jumped on and started listening to us. We really appreciate it. If you have an idea for a subject for a show, if there's a case, a UFO case that you'd like to see us dive into, let us know. Reach out to the show. If there is a other subject, even like Bigfoot, winged humanoid, or whatever, if you want to hear our take on that, let us know. We get enough requests, we'll definitely look into anything that falls within the purview of weird wonders of the world and UFOs. And once again, if you have an encounter yourself or have a story to tell about someone that had an encounter of any kind, be sure and reach out to the show and let us know. And if you will let us, we would love to share it on the show. Just if you want to remain anonymous, that's fine. Just let us know beforehand. And we would only thing we require is maybe where you're from, what state, country, city, what have you, just to put it in a geographical perspective. This is Stephen Hawk. I guess I am done for the night, and I am signing out.
Ditto.
Always wait to see what you're going to say. All right. So for Cosmic Sponge, I'm out of here, and we will see you next week.
Ditto. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.